Hi everyone, I'm Matt Brill and Enterprise Coordinator with East Sussex County Council. Welcome to our session around delivering guidance remotely using a practical approach. So this is being brought to you by Hannah Courtney Bennett of Talent and Career in partnership with the Careers Hub East Sussex and Careers and Enterprise Company. We hope that careers leaders and careers guidance professionals across our schools and colleges find this useful, and I'll now pass you over to Hannah.
Thank you, Matt. Hello, everybody. I'm actually going to turn my camera off now so we can just focus on the PowerPoint presentation. So this session is about the practical points of delivering guidance remotely. A bit about me before we go any further. My background's mainly in psychology. I work with individuals across the age range in a career coaching capacity, and I've been working with schools and colleges for the last 15 years or so. I've also been conducting video guidance with international students for some years as well. So a little picture of me so you can put the name to the face. The aims and outcomes of this session today then are to look at how to prepare for a remote guidance session, to review the skills you need to manage the session, and consider safeguarding implications. The session itself is going to be split into 3 parts. Short presentation, which I'm delivering now. Secondly, we're going to do a role play with a quote unquote year 10 student, who's actually my daughter, just to sort of give you an idea for those that haven't done remote video guidance before, what that looks like, what that might feels. I doubt very much we'll do it perfectly, so we'll sort of have a quick look about how we kind of get through it without making it work. And then last of all, we'll have a quick question answer session with some questions that people have already sent in. Okay, so let's start off with tips for setting up the image for your video conferencing. It's really important to remember that when you're on screen, everything in the frame that your client sees will have an effect on them, either consciously or subconsciously. And this in turn impacts on how they relate to you. Things that we can really control is the lighting. So remember that the only area you need to light is your face, and soft lighting in front of you works best, ideally natural light. But if you can't sit in front of a window, position a lamp in front of you but behind the device you're using, and avoid bright lights such as ceiling lights, spotlights or windows behind you. Secondly, the background. So I think everyone's can think of some anecdotes in recent weeks of things that have happened in the background, either to themselves, I hope not, or to other people when they've been on meetings and other things have gone on, and they can be quite funny. But to ensure that your student, your client is concentrating, think about what's going on in your background and think about what it says about you. So even a white wall behind you will say something to the viewer, so make some conscious choices about what's going on. Something worth mentioning is that photographs or even books, if you can read the titles, can be a distraction. I mean, your eye is just naturally drawn and you try to read the title and it can be quite distracting. Think about the level of the camera, so eye level and line. This is very important. Consider where the lens of the camera, so the camera lens on your device, consider where that is in relation to your eye. A high angle can make you look, so if you're looking up at the camera, it makes you look a bit subservient. Looking down can make you look a bit dominant. So ideally you want to frame yourself in the centre, looking forwards, making eye contact with your client, and this will convey confidence and credibility. What that means in practical terms, for me, I find that a box file with my laptop raises the camera to a fairly good level for eye contact. It also helps my double chin. Please avoid holding the device or even having it on your lap. as that can make it really tiring and distracting for the person you're talking to if the image is jiggling around. I always sit at my desk in my home office, and this I feel really helps towards consistency, quality and professionalism. So let's just have a look at this next slide, which is of the government, I think on a cabinet meeting. And there you can see different members of parliament are have different levels of competence, it would seem, in framing themselves on a screen. So just draw your attention very quickly to what I consider to be some good ones. We've got on the left hand side, 4 down, good lighting, looking directly at the centre of the screen, and similarly on the top row, 4 across from the left. She's using her phone, but again, very good, well lit, right in the middle of the screen. So on to how to prepare. So first of all, we'll talk about the student and how we manage that. First thing is that the practitioners and the managers within your school, so that's you and your senior leadership team and other relevant teachers, need to have a conversation and agree who's going to do what and who's going to take responsibility for what. In other words, who's going to arrange the appointment and make the initial contact with the student. Was that the form tutor? Is that you? Is it the head of year? Once contact has been made, you need to look at whoever has arranged the session needs to explain how the logistics of the meeting are going to work with the student and, if appropriate, the parent, and what a number of expectations that need to be addressed, i.e. the student will appear appropriately dressed, the meeting will not be held in their bedroom, they should be downstairs in one of the reception rooms on the house's ground floor. One thing to mention here is if the student doesn't have access to a video platform, or indeed is reluctant to use it, then of course the consultation can be done on the phone. So that's sort of organising the appointments. Then over to you and actually the actual running of the appointments. So I always send an email either the evening before or the morning before, reminding the student that they've got their careers meeting, reminding them of the time and reminding them of where you're going to meet them. So, for example, dear so-and-so, your careers meeting is at such and such a time. I look forward to seeing you in Teams. On to the next slide. Then you're actually, how do you go about preparing yourself? Obviously, we've already talked about camera and lighting and desk space, etc. It's important to make sure that the rest of the house knows that you're not to be disturbed. Close the door of the room that you're working in. I always try to get onto the platform early, just so that you're double checking your internet connection again, everything's in place, you're not rushing. Sometimes if you're using Microsoft Teams, the student might have messaged you, so you can deal with that. And just to make sure that you've got the right links in order to find them. Similarly, if you're working on Zoom, I think it's always really nice to be there waiting for them when they access the platform, as it's not very nice having to wait to be let into a room. Don't forget to check your phone and make sure that it's on silent. Obviously, don't turn it off because the student might try and contact you if they're having problems accessing the video link for whatever reason. And then the other thing, of course, is the time available. I know some students, I know some schools only allow 30-minute time slots for their guidance sessions. I think we all agree that 40 minutes is probably the best or the shortest you could do it properly. I would really recommend that with remote guidance, the time slot, the minimum time slot is 40 minutes, just to allow yourself some slack in case the student wants to talk at length about something else. You know, in the current circumstances, opportunities for one-to-one discussions have been somewhat limited for everybody. You're going to sort of say, you're going to meet a student and say, so how is it? And they might have lots to talk about, and you need to factor that possibility in as well as delivering a good guidance session. So yeah, allow some slack in your diary. Now on to hardware kit. Depends really what you've got available to you. I mean, I always use 2 screens as I find that much easier in terms of what can go wrong. If you're trying to look up links and that sort of thing, rather than use a screen share or even come off the screen whilst you're talking to the person, A, I think you lose rapport, and B, it can be quite time consuming if you're not very, very adept at it. So I find it much easier to look things up as I go along while still maintaining eye contact with your client. That also means that you can identify a link, you can reassure yourself the link is still current and up to date, and you can drop it straight into the report that you're writing. In terms of height of screen, so this is my desk, you can see in this picture. I choose to use a tablet because the camera is much closer to the screen. It's a smaller screen, so I find the eye-to-eye contact is easier. And if you need to use a phone, that of course also works very well. In fact, personally, I find the phone is the easiest piece of kit in terms of eye-to-eye contact, although obviously in MS Teams you do lose functionality. Moving on then to actual running of the meeting, just starting it off from the beginning. Remember to get into the zone before the call, make sure your voice is warmed up. Make the call, meet and greet the student and establish effective rapport. Right at the beginning, check the sound quality and introduce yourself. I then, although I wouldn't normally in a face-to-face guidance session, with remote guidance, I immediately go into confidentiality, which feels appropriate, especially because there's an observer present and you need to acknowledge the purpose of that observer. You know, they are there shadowing you, and also agreeing the ground rules at the outset. Talk about confidentiality in terms of the fact that you won't be sharing the conversation with anybody else. You know, you won't be talking to their parents or their teachers about what they have to say. So, you know, encourage the student to discuss their ideas openly. Also remembering to say, of course, you know, if they disclose anything that suggests that they are putting themselves or other people at risk, you would, of course, have to pass that on to the appropriate person. Acknowledge the situation. I alluded to this a bit earlier in terms of the time allowed for or time you make available for the guidance session. These are rather unusual times that we're living in, to say the least. You know, you'll likely be talking to a student who's been locked down for some weeks now, and it would be a nonsense to pretend everything was normal. So, as I said, acknowledge the situation, ask them how they've been finding homeschooling, and obviously if there's a parent present in the room or passing through, that's the time to acknowledge them as well. And as I said, be prepared to have quite a conversation here if the student wants to. If not, you can just move straight on. So the next the next stage then is to signpost how the meeting would work, just as you would in a face-to-face session. You know, you're meeting with them to discuss what they want to do after their GCSEs and talk through their ideas for the future. Ask them if there's anything specific they want to cover. I always say that I'm going to attempt to summarise directly into another document as we go through, and I use that to explain that my eye gaze from time to time will be moving off to another screen, and you know, apologise and say I hope they didn't find that too distracting. And then I make the point that at the end we'll agree action points, and then that document will then be emailed to them, and it will also be emailed to another point of contact, perhaps, or maybe you'll just keep it yourself in the school, then to refer to in the case they lose it. At that point, you sort of finish the contracting, double check that that's what they're expecting from the session. Is that okay? And then I move into the stage 2 of developing their issues and identifying their goals. So then, quick bit about troubleshooting. You know, it's the internet, it's technology, things do go wrong. So first of all, let's cover what happens if the student doesn't show up. Interestingly, although I've had some late starts, this hasn't actually ever happened to me since lockdown. Remember, you sent them their reminder that morning or the evening before. You may have their number, so you can contact them on the phone. Or actually, if you use MS Teams, you can just drop them an email via their school email address. MS Teams gives you the facility to leave a voicemail message as well, and I just say I'm phoning about their careers meeting, sorry to miss them, I'll call back in 5 minutes, and normally then they come back to you before that 5 minutes is up. Sometimes the student is reluctant to use the camera. That's absolutely fine. I just continue as an audio call. I do invite them to use the camera. Very often they turn it on. Sometimes they don't. And actually, what if the call is of poor quality? Well, that can be because the connection is poor. Sometimes it's worth disconnecting the call and starting it again. If that doesn't work, I suggest that we both turn off our cameras, which reduces your bandwidth. And if that still doesn't work, you can, of course, revert to a phone. Then finally, safeguarding. So this is obviously, I expect your school has a safeguarding policy document and East Sussex County Council has a safeguarding policy document, but I'll just touch on the brief points of how to attend to safeguarding issues in the context of video calls. So firstly, the current safeguarding procedures that we've always worked with should still be adhered to. No surprises there. So this means that we, as practitioners, must be DBS checked. We must have undertaken the relevant safeguarding training and be prepared to adhere to statutory safeguarding guidance. And we should know who the designated safeguarding lead is within the school that we work with, how to contact them, and how to make safeguarding referrals. Moving on then, in terms of contracting, we should ensure that the contracting part of the interaction takes place just as it would a face-to-face interaction, even if we have previously engaged with that student before. So we need to talk about safeguarding, we need to talk about confidentiality. In terms of how the interaction will work, just explain, again, going into the writing of the report, the confidentiality, the purpose of the observer. An interesting point here, which I hadn't necessarily thought about before, but it's quite obvious, is of course meetings should be held within an agreed time frame. So in terms of students, this should be within normal school times. Explain that a record of each meeting should be kept in terms of how the meeting was delivered, summary of the discussion, the actions that were agreed. So probably your record of the meeting that you then deliver to the student will double up as the necessary record of the meeting. We've talked about there being an observer present. Always try to avoid one-to-one situations. If you haven't got somebody in a separate room, quote unquote, which, as we're going to demonstrate in the role play, how that will work in teams, make sure that a parent is going to be around and ready to refer to as appropriate. And then I've referred to this earlier, issues around suitable clothing, not just you and the student, but with anyone else in the household. And also that devices are used in appropriate areas, for example, not in bedrooms. And then the last point, which I think is really important, is CPD. So that's pretty much what we're covering at the moment, isn't it? In terms of acknowledging that you, as a practitioner, won't be very experienced in this method of delivery. Do practice, do rehearse just as if you were working with a student and say, let's have a practice interview. If you've not done one before, get together with a colleague and do a practice guidance session. And then if you've got any concerns, do express that to your manager and seek advice where necessary.
For this next segment, Hannah is going to deliver a remote guidance session with Nancy, who's going to be role-playing a Year 10 student. The safeguarding guidelines around remote guidance stipulate that another person should shadow the meeting in the background, and so consider me to be that other person, and a member of staff who is off camera but witnessing the session. So over to you, Hannah.
Thank you. Hello, Nancy.
Hello.
Before we go any further, I'm just checking the quality of the sound. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
That's great. So I don't know if you can see it on screen. Oh yes, you can. If you look down at the bottom of your screen, you can see the initials MB. So that's another member of staff from school. And they are there shadowing the meeting for safeguarding purposes, a bit like being on CCTV, really. Mm-hmm. And that it's just for safeguarding purposes, as I said, and we're not recording the meeting or anything like that. So apart from that, our conversation is confidential. I'm not going to discuss what we talk about with your parents or your teachers or anything, although I will be putting together a summary, a report of what we talk about, which I will be sharing with you, and that will also be kept by a member of staff. Talk about more about that in a minute. What I do need to just mention is, just as with the teachers at school, if you do mention anything to me that indicates you're putting yourself at risk or anyone else at risk, I do of course have to pass that on. So as I said, as I go through, I'm going to be summarising what we've talked about, and at the end we'll agree some action points. I'm going to be doing that directly into a screen which is just to the right of the screen here, so I keep looking to the side. That's what I'm doing. I hope that's not too distracting.
Yeah, that's fine.
Good. And as I said, I would encourage you to, after our conversation, look at the report and do talk about the content and your thoughts with friends or family and reflect on things, because that helps you to develop your ideas going forward. Okay. Mm-hmm. So it must have been a bit of a strange few weeks for you, being at home all this time. How have you been finding it?
It's been okay, a little bit boring. It'd be nice to be able to see my friends and everything, but it's okay.
Are you managing to keep in touch with them all right?
Yeah.
We're all saying thank goodness for the internet, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so the purpose of this meeting, as I mentioned, is for you to think about what your next steps are after your GCSEs. We'll also talk a little bit about careers, work experience, possibly university, if that's something that you wanted to talk about. Do you have anything specific that you wanted to cover?
I don't think so, just general.
And also I should add, if you still, which most people are at your stage, if you still have no idea about what you want to do in terms of career, or even what you want to do in terms of A-levels, that's absolutely fine. That's exactly what we're here to start to explore.
Okay.
Okay, so let's start by talking about where you're at the moment, Nancy. Before I do that, though, of course, I just need to make sure I've got your personal details correct. So I'm right in thinking you're year 10, is that right? Mm-hmm. And I've got your school email here. So yes, that's I've got all the information that I need. So yes, let's talk about where you're at the moment then. Could you start off, please, by telling me what your GCSE option subjects are?
So I'm doing double science, and I'm doing French, Spanish, geography, PE, and textiles.
Right, okay. And for those subjects, and also your core subjects, have you got a feel yet for what your predicted grades are?
I think the way that things are going, probably between 6s and 8s for all of them.
So a range, sort of 6s, 7s and 8s, you think?
Yeah.
Brilliant, okay. And what are your favourite subjects?
I quite like all of them because obviously I've chosen to do them, but my favourite one's probably geography and PE.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. Ordinarily, I would go on to start talking about plans for where the student wanted to go for sixth form or college or apprenticeships, possibly.
Mm-hmm.
But instead, I'm going to go straight to the end of the session and start summarising the meeting. Okay, is that right with you, Nancy?
Yeah.
So, okay, Nancy. So let's summarise what we've talked about. We talked about your ideas about where you want to go next year and where to find the information that you need with regards to open events, whether that's virtually or ones in the autumn and possibly after Christmas. We've looked quickly at work experience and talked about how you can build on that doing virtual projects this summer.
Mm-hmm.
Talked a little bit about university and how you can start to research ideas about what career pathways exist that might match your strengths and interests. Yeah?
Yeah.
Have you got any, are there any other areas or anything you want to go back on in more detail?
I don't think so, thank you. I think all okay.
So let's go into a bit of action planning then. So in terms of agreeing actions, can you remember what the first thing you need to do is?
Go to the link that you're putting in my report and go from there.
Yeah, so well, the links about the virtual open events at the colleges, and also the links to the grammar schools that you said you were interested in. Is that right? Yeah, so that's that. Then work experience. So that again is accessing the links and doing the research there and trying to find a suitable work experience placement that you'd like to engage with. Then I was going to put the link into the UCAS database for you, so you can start to explore different universities. And then, of course, the Careers Explorer website, which will give you the opportunity to look at all sorts of different careers that you may or may not have thought about, and have a look and see and try and identify a direction.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that's everything. Have we forgotten anything, do you think?
I don't think so. That's all been.
Okay. So I'll tidy up the summary that I've written, and I'll put all that together, and I will email that over to you to your school email address later on today. All right?
Yes.
Is that okay? Hopefully that's been useful.
Yes.
Excellent. Well, enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you.
And I hope you manage to have a productive summer.
Thank you. You too.
Bye. Bye.
So we're now going to run through some questions received from some of our East Sussex careers advisors, which we'll be asking Hannah to kindly address. So Hannah, just a handful of questions that have been pitched to us through the Careers Hub. So firstly, during an interview, I would often look at a prospectus or research information online with a student, but this isn't possible during a virtual guidance interview. I'm using Google Meet, which doesn't have a share screen facility. Would you look up information whilst on the call or refer the student to information sources in their action plan?
Okay. So I think I sort of covered this very, very briefly in the little presentation I did earlier. So the way I prefer to work is, even with platforms that do have shared screen share facility, is I like to have access to two screens. Some advisors I know do enjoy using screen share, but I find that it really slows things down in terms of I'm now going to share my screen with you, and then it takes a while and you get a delay, and in my opinion you're losing precious minutes. So what I do is I use two screens, as you would have seen during the role play. I'm very often typing into one screen whilst I'm speaking with the student, and they can say, oh, I thought about this, or I might say, well, have you looked at this? And as we know with links, they don't stay valid very long, so I do always try and double check them every day that I refer somebody to them, so and say, oh yes, it's still there, and yes, and you can go into it on that date, or Bexhill College have now given a date for when their virtual taster day is going to be. Look, it's here now, it wasn't there yesterday, type thing. So it is worth doing that if you've got 2 screens available to you. If you haven't, don't worry, just say, I'll look that up for you and I'll include the link in the report when I send it. And that's absolutely fine as well. It's just, A, it's about personal style, and B, it's about working within the constraints of the kit you've got available to you, really.
Brilliant, thank you, Hannah. So second question that came through, some of the students I've spoken to have mentioned COVID-19 and asked about the effect that this may have on their future education or job prospects. So what advice would you potentially offer these students?
Okay, so this is a really difficult one, isn't it? Because obviously you've got to be honest, and as we've already mentioned, it's worthwhile acknowledging the situation and acknowledging that it's uncertain times. I think I found it really helpful where students are uncertain or anxious, is reiterating that everyone's in the same boat, and I absolutely do not mean that that everyone is living under the same set of circumstances, because obviously we know that to be true, not to be true. But in terms of everyone's in the same boat, in that nobody's sat their GCSEs, everybody's experiencing a different way of being assessed, so everyone's going to be affected equally. And I find that quite a calming thing to say to students. What you can say is they will get results on result day, and very likely it'll be the results they anticipated. If for whatever reason they're disappointed with one of the subjects or all their subjects, they will have the opportunity to retake them in the autumn if they want to. Very often when you mention that, they go, I don't think I want to. But you can say that to them as well. I have heard people, so I've attended a couple of webinars on this, and I have heard people sort of say, well, you can trot out the following line, although I'm not sure how helpful it is. But you can say, you know, it's important to keep a sense of perspective. In the fullness of time, your GCSE results will matter less, which is true, but at the moment, to that student, their GCSE results are really important to them. So I think that's good advice, but I'm not sure how helpful it is to say that at this current time.
Okay. Thank you, Hannah. So next question, when discussing their target GCSE grades, some students have expressed concern as to whether they'll still achieve those grades. So what advice would you offer in that situation?
Obviously, it really depends on the student that you're talking to, and sort of all sorts of things. You know, what sort of level of attainment they were likely to achieve, how conscientious they are, how easy they are to reach in terms of engaging with education. So all those things come into that sort of equation. So I don't think there's any answer fits all for this one, but I think what you can ask is, you know, what information have they had so far in terms of what they're likely to achieve? You know, how did they do for their mocks? What have their past reports been like? And do you think that, you know, you can ask them whether you think you could ask them whether they think that's a true reflection of what they're likely to have achieved, and very often they know. And the key thing is try not to worry, and going back to if there's something you're really not happy with, it's something that you will be able to revisit in the autumn if you want to.
Great, thank you. And last but not least, so far the students I've spoken to have been engaged and happy to talk to me. but moving forward, it may be that virtual guidance interviews become mandatory, and so a student may not be as enthusiastic. It could potentially be harder to build rapport virtually. So what could you suggest can be done to engage with a reluctant student?
Okay, so motivating reluctant students, motivating reluctant teenagers. So there's a lot of psychology here, and some of you may have done some training in motivational interviewing, and you can really draw on that interviewing style because it really comes into play here. And to sort of praise, this is a webinar in its own right, to be honest, but to sort of to think about the core things that I believe are important, really think about the language that you're using to question those students. Very often there will be things that they perhaps should have done that they haven't done, and rather than sort of letting that come into your dialogue, you know, ask what could you do to address that, or what have you done already, let's catch up, rather than saying why haven't you done this, why haven't you done that, in a very parenting sort of way. What's also helpful to think about is circles of control. You know, help them to think about what they, rather than sort of rant and rail about it's not fair, or I don't know where I'm going, I can't make a decision. Bring it right down to a level that's closer with the student, so they can think about what's in their control and what they can influence. And things like, for example, whether or not universities are going to be recruiting in the same way in 3 years' time, or whether in 5 years' time there's going to be any work at all for 18 to 24-year-olds. They can't control that. We sort of need to park that and try and explain how those things are different to them and get them to engage with the things that they can control. Other things to think about which can be useful are the stages of change model that's used in counselling about changing behaviours. And then, just as a really good reference, if you're really interested in motivating students, as I said, it's something I could deliver a whole webinar on. There's somebody called Erica Sosner, and she has something called the hero's journey, and that's got a really useful sort of dialogue about how to motivate teenagers.
Okay. Interesting. So some great resources out there as well. Thank you so much, Hannah, for your time to answer those questions. Some really interesting points, I think, for all of us to consider, both in preparing for and delivering guidance sessions with students remotely. So thank you very much for your time on that.
Thank you. So those are the 3 parts of this session. We've had a short webinar, we have had a role play, and we've had a question and answer session. And I feel that we've run through the practicalities of running a remote guidance session. You've had the opportunity to observe, although albeit rather a truncated session, but observe a remote guidance session with a Year 10, and we have discussed what the likely challenges might be in terms of delivering remote guidance. So just to quickly revisit the stated aims at the outset, we've considered how to prepare for a remote guidance meeting. We've reviewed the skills in terms of guidance skills required to manage the session, and also technical skills, of course. And we've also considered the implications of the safeguarding guidelines and how to work within these. So thank you very much for having me.
Hannah, thank you so much for that and for your time for the session today. Thanks for the insight you shared from your experience of delivering guidance sessions remotely. Thank you also to your daughter Nancy for helping out as a Year 10 student as well. Hopefully this will really benefit other careers advisors in the East Sussex area, as well as further afield. So thanks to everyone for taking the time to watch today, and do speak to your school or college's enterprise coordinator if you have any questions following this session. So thanks again, and thanks for watching.